What is going on, guys? Bingo here. I'm with the Dual Factory for this week's episode of X2 Drop, our Yu-Gi-Oh podcast we do every week, talking about something within the trading card game. It could be product release, could be ban list, could be whatever the fuck we're feeling like that week. And this week, we are going to be talking about the impact that the pot cards have had, their design, and possibly where we think they could go in the future. But before we get into that, if you guys do enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh content, check out the Dual Factory over on YouTube. He's been uploading really consistently. He just uploaded a invoked Eldritch deck profile, and he knows what the fuck he's doing, so go check him out. Personally, I won't be uploading anything besides these podcasts for the next couple of weeks till I get settled at my new place. But if you do want to be part of the community, have your voice heard, talk about the podcast topics, or just feel like jumping in somewhere to duel somebody, go check out the Discord. It's been set up, links wherever you're watching this. It's in the description. So, Joe, you got anything to say about your channel before we kick it?
Like I said, if you're interested in deck profiles for competitive theory for Rogue and meta mostly, I'm the place to go. I do, unfortunately, as John's Discord described, I do no life the game, so I mean, there's that. But yeah, and then hopefully I'm going to be doing more stuff like combo videos and stuff like that, so I'm actually really excited to actually get back to making content.
Yeah, so go check them out. It should be a good time. But this week, like I said, we're talking about the impact and design of the pot cards. This is everything from Greed to the newly released Prosperity. And these cards have seen a severe impact on the way the game is played a lot of the time when they come out. Now, there's been some flops and some like, what the fuck is that cards? But over the years, these have had a lot of impact on deck building and the generic draw in the game. So just breaking it down from roughly release to present, we've had in order Greed, Pot of Greed, Avarice, Generosity, Duality, Dichotomy, Riches, Desires, Acquisitiveness, Extravagance, and Prosperity. Now, I don't think we forgot any, and the order might be a little bit off, but that's not really the point. With Pot of Greed, right? Everybody knows what this card is. It's never gonna be legal again in the game, and if they do, it's because they errated it for whatever fucking reason. Like, there's a reason this is one of the Trinity cards, right? In Go format.
The Holy Trinity.
Yeah, it's just generic draw two. Yu-Gi-Oh can't have it. Obviously, it's really good. And then you jump to present day where we have cards like Desires and Extravagance, which do the same effect, right? You draw two cards, but they have these massive drawbacks or restrictions to them. Desires, you have to banish like 25% of your deck if you're playing a optimal 40 card build. Extravagance, you can only play it as the first card during your turn. Can't draw the rest of the turn. You have to banish 6 cards from your extra deck, which is almost 130 or it's a little more than 130 your extra deck. So obviously draw is extremely powerful. Joe, after all that introduction, this was your topic idea. What made you want to talk about this?
The real reason I really want to talk about it is because just recently we got another pot card in Prosperity. So the very last one that just got released, and it's like it's more and more common theme that like Konami themselves are willing to give us like generic +1s in Yu-Gi-Oh, but as you were saying, it's like it's something that like it's like it has like a hefty cost or like hinders like deck building and stuff like that. We really started to see that. From the Dark Illusions, that's when Pot of Desires came out. And I remember when this card came out. Because I remember looking at it initially, and I'm like, this seems kind of steep. But as the months went on before we even got the card, right? You're just sitting there, and you're just like, huh, the banishment doesn't seem that bad. Or something like that. But then I noticed like a trend in like changing of like how deck building was. Because of the way Desires like function, you had to play like more 3-ofs. And that's why I think like all the pot cards like did something like similar to that. You changed the way your deck was built, and every time one's released, you see the theme going on. Like it's with every single one of them too. I think it's just a really cool aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah, and Desires is a big turning point with the pot cards, and that's because that is when it jumped back to no restrictions, you can just play this card whenever you want. It's just you are paying a huge cost. And if you remember, Desires was pretty cheap on pre-order. Wasn't it like $30 to $40 somewhere in there?
Yeah, pre-order. Actually, honestly, I think it might have been as low as 25.
Yeah, I know it was cheap, and that's the community didn't see like how good it was off the bat, because I remember that was like roughly when I was getting back into the game, and it was like one of the first things I saw. I saw Desires go from $30 to $50 to fucking $70. Like, I just saw this thing jumping up, and luckily I had somebody like good enough to understand like it's just draw 2 cards, right? You see 2 cards, that's it. Those 10 cards don't fucking matter at all, right?
Desires actually holds a special place in my heart, because what is it? The first time I ever played Desires actually was in 2016 in Indianapolis. That's the regional one where I actually had my most success.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Bro, that card, especially like in decks like Mermail that just play a bunch of 3-0s, just being able to consistently see like your best engine card more consistently. I thought that was like the end all be all, like +1 that we were ever going to get there at the time. It was crazy.
Yeah, and like this card is still I don't want to say controversial, but it's very it does have a divide in the community. Like, is it good? Is it bad? Like, certain people, like, they know it's good, but they hate it because they always draw Desires off Desires, right? Or they always banish the one thing they need. Like,
keep the meme alive.
People know it's a good card. Some newer players might not see the value in, okay, why do I want to banish 25% of my deck just to draw 2 cards? But that's like the huge breaking point. And since Desires, like, Acquisitiveness was it's not really a generic draw card. It's kind of an oddball, like Generosity and Duality. Like, it doesn't really fit like the normal pot cards. It had its niche in 2016. It sees like people talk about it every couple of formats as like a tech. And it's because it's a quick play, draw 1. If it was a draw 2, I think it'd have a lot more experimentation.
Actually, isn't it the only pot card? Yeah, it's the only pot card that's a quick play. That's actually a really interesting point to bring up.
So it's nice. It has its uses, its disruption, but I wouldn't really put it in this discussion that we're having today, because I don't know. In my mind, pot cards draw 2 cards, right? I know Duality exists, and even Prosperity. Like, I like Prosperity as a card, but if you had to like tell me like the next pot card coming out, I wouldn't have ever guessed Prosperity, right?
I think Prosperity is way more broken than we could have actually dreamed, but we can talk about that a little later.
Now, Prosperity, we'll get to that. It's super good, but
let's talk about one that was 1 line of text away from being broken.
1 line of text? Yeah, okay. I was going to say it needed 1 less line of text, because that's Dichotomy. Oh, yeah, for sure. That card was so close to being broken. And it came out at the right time. Like, for those of you who remember 2014 format, that card was... I remember reading this card. I'm like, I thought this card was insane. And then I read, like, the entire card, where you're just sitting there, and it says, I think it's you can't battle that card. I got the effect. So for anybody listening that does not know Dichotomy, because it hasn't really had any relevance since like 2014, at the start of your main phase, main phase 1, target 3 monsters with a different type in your graveyard, shuffle all 3 of them into the deck, then draw 2 cards. You can't conduct your battle phase during the turn you activate this card. So this, you see a lot of overlap with other pot cards, right? Later, we got Extravagance, who kept that at the start of your main phase restriction. But this one, unlike Extravagance, where you can fulfill the cost on turn 1, you can't target 3 monsters at the start of your main phase 1 if you're going first, right? There's no setup. So this card's dead going first. And then the battle phase is like irrelevant. So, well, that's the funny thing I thought about it too, because like the battle phase restriction's honestly not that bad, but like I thought this was going to be like, especially back like when this card like first came out, I thought it was going to be one of those like pot cards that aged like really, really well and would have found a way into the format, simply because, like you said, the battle phase doesn't matter. It's more of a formality. But like, and then like I thought Yu-Gi-Oh was also going to be a lot grindier, but obviously that's not true. But
it's just I thought this card to me is great, especially like when you think about it in like combo decks, because like most combo decks anyway, especially like their extra deck, they're all different types, so it just has a nice little home. Just
yeah,
like
it's just the restriction of at the start of your main phase 1 and needing graveyard setup. Like we can see both of these in different pot cards. We have Avarice, which is arguably, because it has no restrictions, it's just you play it down, shuffle 5 back, draw 2. And that's seeing little to no play right now, and that's because it needs setup. And then you have Extravagance, which sees a whole bunch of play, but it can't go in every deck because not every deck wants to sacrifice 6 cards from their extra.
Not 6 random cards.
Yeah, 6 random cards. Like Prosperity is so good because you can hand select which cards you want to banish. It's because game 1, you're like, okay, I know I'm not going to need this. I'm not going to need this, whatever. I just need to see that one card.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But, yeah, so, I mean, that brings us to the point where, like, Dichotomy and Riches were both very, very interesting cards, right? It's just the restrictions on them. I got to pull up Riches because I already forgot.
Riches is almost identical to Dichotomy, but it's specifically for Pendulum. Like, this card was also really cool.
Yeah, so it doesn't have at the start of your main phase 1, like Dichotomy, but it says shuffle 3 Pendulum monsters into the deck from your graveyard and or extra deck face up, then draw 2. You can only activate 1 per turn. You cannot special summon the turn you activate this except Pendulum Summon, which that obviously you're not playing Pendulum Control, right? Like you can't afford to not Xyz Summon, Synchro Summon, Link Summon, whatever. You can't afford to do that in a Pendulum deck. If that, just like Dichotomy, if that last restriction was off, like the card would at least see a lot more experimentation. Because
this card.
Oh, go ahead.
This card also is like another example of a card that came out at the right time. It just didn't like adapt well. Because it came out of Secrets of Eternity, I believe. Yeah, Secrets of Eternity. And at the time, a deck that could really take advantage of it was like Clifford. It's like it wasn't a traditional Pendulum deck. You know what I mean? Like it was like a stun deck, but it had Pendulum aspects, so on and so forth. The problem is you had better cards like searchable cards like Climate Change and stuff like that. And this card just didn't see any play. And then, as you were saying, the extra restriction you can't even play it in modern day Pendulum.
I like to take a look at, because you go from Greed and Avarice, which were insanely powerful and both have been banned. Like we just got Avarice back. I think we got 1 copy back in late 19, but I could be wrong. Which had no restrictions and they were just super good. And then the next like draw 2 pot card came out was Dichotomy, and they just piled on the restrictions. And it's like, okay, we don't want this to break the game. We want it to be like a get you back into the match, you know, get your resources back, draw 2. And it was too much of a restriction. And then they kind of toned it down with Riches. They took off 1 restriction, but they added another. And it's like they're trying to feel out what restrictions they can put on a card where it's still good. And then you get to Desires, which someone at Konami was probably like, they're not going to play this. And then anything that says draw 2 where you're not restricted in the slightest, the TCG will find a way to abuse it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Look at it's not even a pot card, but look at Second's Light, just putting that out there.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you can take that argument. It's like, look at Second's Light. This card says you can't play any other spell cards besides Second's Light.
And you
draw 2 cards. Right? And it's at 1.
Literally, TCG players, like, they skipped, like, the entire, like, paragraph of text, and all they saw was draw 2. You're like,
yeah.
That's all they saw, +2.
Yeah.
And that's why I love that. That's hilarious.
And, like, that's... it might as well be a pot card, right? Like, it could say pot of whatever, and it has that same restriction. And that's just another... Like, think about that. You are saying 1/3 of the card types you're not allowed to play, but you get to draw 2 cards maybe 3 times a game if you're super lucky. Like,
oh yeah,
they're willing. TCG players are willing to do that. Desires, you're willing to banish 25% of your deck. Extravagance, ditch 6 cards from your extra. Prosperity, which isn't even draw 2. It's dig 6 cards in your deck and find the one you want and add it to your hand. Like, there's a reason the TCG doesn't get cards that just lets you rota anything into your hand, because it's not Magic, it's not Pokemon. You can't just be adding the key broken card that you want to look for, because that's just not good for the game, I'll be honest.
Oh no, and Yu-Gi-Oh! The problem is with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like we're at the point where like there's so many decks that have just like we'll say bomb cards, but they're all they really are just like 1-card starters. If you have like another chance to get at a 1-card starter, bro, that's just insane. And then like what makes it even worse is like a lot of the pot cards or even draw cards in general, they pay for the sins of their forefathers, because like look at like Pot of Greed, and then like we'll take it a step further and like look at like Graceful Charity, and like look what they did. And then they're just like, well, we can't do this again. And then now, like, and then you had like the dichotomies and riches, and we'll even go as far as equivalence and stuff like that. And then Konami's like, well, obviously we're putting way too much restriction, so what are we going to do now? And then you see these modern day ones. And honestly, I think like what I like about these newer pot cards versus the older pot cards, yes, they generate +1s, right? Like that's the biggest thing that we're looking for in Yu-Gi-Oh! But at the same time, it's not like an overbearing +1 is basically what it looks like. Because like you said, Extravagance can only be activated as the first card. Desires, you have to do this. Or the only one that breaks the mold on that one, and that's why I think it's the craziest pot card, is Prosperity. Because I was watching this happen the other day. I was watching a Dragon Link player just, play like he normally would. And then he got stopped halfway through his combo. And he just activated a Prosperity to dig for an extender, got it, and kept playing as if nothing happened. That's where I think they really broke the mold of like pot cards when you see that.
I agree, man. It's just cool to see, especially since you've been playing, almost the entire game's life cycle. Like I played way back. I saw the first 2 release, Greed, Avarice, and I think Generosity, but like who cares about that card? We don't acknowledge that card's existence.
It's a pot card, but like it's a pot card no one wanted.
Yeah, but like you look at Disparity, right? In the artwork, it's half of Generosity. Like it's just funny how like it still is a pot card and it's part of the whatever lore they're trying to do. But it's cool seeing the evolution. And I when you wanted to talk about this topic, I was thinking like, what are some things Konami can do to push this envelope even further, or make just more niche draw cards? Because I mean that's pretty much what they're doing, right? Like these restrictions are heavy, right? Not every deck can afford to play Desires. Not every deck can play Extravagance. Like I would say Extravagance is pretty like extremely limited in the decks that can play it, but usually the decks that can play Extravagance or can't play Extravagance can play Desires, right? So it's like,
oh, absolutely.
What's another niche pot card that they can do?
Well, let's see. The popular theme right now is you're restricting like actual like extra deck play, but I mean that's kind of hard to like say, because there's like, let me think here.
Yeah, it's really hard to say, right? It's what is too much, because the second you put one extra restriction on that makes it too hard to play or too hard to fulfill that restriction, it like no one's going to play it. It's just a blank card.
It's actually crazy to think about, because the only thing I can think of like in game that like you could give up, because a lot of decks have like the common like thing like they don't need the extra deck. But they've already printed 2 cards like that. They printed one that's a generic +1, and then they basically printed a second one that says, let me cherry pick a card out of my deck. That we've already seen where we give up like not consistency, but we give up longevity in the game for a quick +1 in Desires. Grave Manipulation we already have in terms of Avarice, Dichotomy.
Yeah,
I mean, it's hard to think of a new bot card.
Yeah, and it's like you can't say life points, right? Because life points don't matter.
That would be crazy. Imagine paying half your life to draw 2.
Fuck it. That's totally worth it. I'll play 3 in a turn.
You can always pay half.
Half's always live, man. And then you're looking at, you know, the hand. It's like, okay, do I discard like discard 2, draw 4, like discard 2 as cost, like, right? Is that, or not discard, send, right? You're never discarding.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, you can't discard.
The only thing I can think of is you could print one that forces you to give up your draw phase, but you already see that in cards like, for example, number 61, Duality, the Timeless. It has an effect similar to that. And then you also see it in even before that, you see it in its predecessor, Reckless Greed. You draw 2, skip your next 2 draw phases.
Yeah, the problem with that is it requires effort, right? You have to go out of your way to make Dugaris. You have to set Reckless Greed, right? Could you imagine a combo deck, just draw 2, skip my next draw phase, whatever. I don't care. The game's not going to go that long.
That might actually just break the game. Could you imagine? That's the only thing I can think of. A pot card that lets you skip a phase for like a quick +1. Bro, that'd be crazy. I want it. Can we get it? Can I get pot of skip my phase? I want it.
I mean, there's like there's some like, you never know. Like, that's the beauty about card design. You never know what can come up. Like, they could do something like excavate 10 cards, like your opponent picks 2 and adds them to your hand. Like, it could be something like absurd like that. Like, you don't get to pick the cards. Like, your opponent can pick them for you, and then that completely shifts deck building, right? Like, I'm going first, my opponent, like, I'm not going to put hand traps in or dead cards. Like, it's going to be all gas, so that every time I play this card, my opponent has to give me good cards. Yeah. Right?
Low key though, if this is how Konami R&D works, you think we should apply?
Who knows, man? But like, think about that. That's another card that would completely shift deck building, because if you're playing that card, it requires your opponent to say, I'm giving you these 2 cards out of your deck, right? So I'm not going to play any bad cards, or else
it's like this. You can have this, but I'm comboing. I'm just not stopping.
Man, that's an interesting one. And then, like the messing with your hand, like, is it worth a draw 2 if your pot card, like the send 2 cards from your hand as cost, draw 2 cards, right? Is it worth taking an Ash on that, right? You're down to 2 cards.
That's a high risk, high reward.
Yeah, that's how I, like, with Graceful Charity, I never want to see that card eroded, because if they did something like that, it just completely, Graceful Charity is not a draw, it's a hand sculpting card, right? Like,
Graceful
Charity is so fucking good in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Like, yeah, it says draw 3, discard 2, but what it's really saying is just cherry pick your hand, and that's not something we need in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah.
I tell you one thing I would like to see, but I think we'll never see it, because I think it might just be too hard to actually get towards. But a middle ground between, like, Duality and Disparity, because, like, Duality, I know, like, when it was released, I think it was Duelist Revolution it was released. I remember, like, people started playing it in every single deck because it just added, like, consistency. Like, yeah, you can't special summon for the turn, but you get to, like, search for, like, a card in your deck, essentially, because you can see the top 3. And then if you think about it, Prosperity is everything Duality wanted to be, but you're giving up extra deck cards to do it. I would like to see a middle ground between those 2 cards, but I don't think, for a pot card at least, I don't think that's possible, because there's no way you can do it without it either being, like, super, like, handicapped or, like, just broken. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Any pot card, like, we haven't talked much about Duality. Like, Duality was an insane card when it was first printed, but any pot card that restricts special summoning, anything that restricts special summoning for you needs to be, like, insane, right? That takes the scopes of the decks that can play it and completely narrows it down to decks you probably don't want to play against anyway. All right, you got the stun, control, like the cheese, I'm not going to let you play decks. Like, nobody likes that. But then you take that restriction away, and Duality is just absolutely insane, right? It's half of Prosperity. So when you're saying middle ground, like, do you want to see something that banishes 3 from the extra and lets you, like, excavate, like,
Not even that is like because obviously like Duality is probably like one of like the most ultimate consistency cards, and like Disparity just like essentially what it does, it kicks it into overdrive, and like you're gonna go 3 deeper than what Duality does, and there's no restriction in special summoning. So like I said, it's just crazy in combo decks, but like Duality, like obviously at the time it was crazy, but like it's super toned down. And like, there's no middle ground in between that. Like, I don't mind like seeing like the top 3 cards of your deck for free, but you can only do like so much in a turn or something like that. Like,
yeah,
I don't know, something like that. Because like there's some cards like not even like necessarily floodgate cards, but like there's cards that let you only like let's do Numeron Network for a moment here, right? When you activate it, it's copying Numeron Calling, and it lets you summon Numerons up to I think it's like up to 4 Numeron cards, but then you can only summon once more that turn or something like that. You know what? Like,
yeah, that
might be the only thing they could print in a Duality / like Prosperity hybrid. Like, yeah, you could reveal like, well, let's find a middle ground. Let's say you can reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. You can add one to your hand, but you can only like search once more that turn, or you can only summon once more, like something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think anything that's generically adding with like a limited cost, like no heavy cost, right? Not a heavy cost. I'm talking about the desires and extravagance, where you are sacrificing possible plays to get that advantage.
Oh yeah.
I was just gonna say we're probably not gonna see a spiritual successor to Duality. Like a card's good, it's cemented, but that's an interesting idea, limiting the amount of summons you can do. Because that's obviously where the advantage gaining cards gets abused in the TCG is the summoning mechanics are so fast and so free these days that if you're not restricted on the summons, it's just going to go sec as light, right?
Every time.
So if it's like there's a small cost and you get to draw 2 cards, but you're limited to X number of summons, whatever summon that is, it could be 5, so that you can still get nibbed. Who knows, right? But whatever that is, like that's an interesting way to look at it because you have this advantage, but maybe you can't capitalize on it this turn, or maybe you can because you're playing Dogmatica, fucking Eldritch or Invoked Eldritch, right? Where you're not spamming monsters, but there always needs to be that oversight, like how does this pair with other draw cards? Because the second you get draw into draw into draw, like terraforming into chicken game into upstart into chicken game, like that's where you're crossing a line with deck building, right? So
chicken game was like the world's biggest mistake. There's like pay 1,000 life points, draw a card. Oh, yeah. I can give up life points for cards.
You can play 31 cards in your deck because you have 3 upstart, 3 chicken game, 3 terraforming. Like, sweet.
Oh yeah.
And then have that in Sky Striker, broken.
Bro, chicken game and Sky Striker, I'm sick. I'm sick.
But yeah, just something to think about. I actually think that would be a very cool concept for the next card, is limiting the amount of summons you can do, because Extravagance already says you can't draw, right? Prosperity already says you can't do something. I honestly don't remember because I don't own them.
You can draw cards the turn you activate it, and you can only deal half damage.
Yeah, so you can't draw cards the turn you activate it. Fair.
You can still kill them. You just have to put a lot of damage.
As long as Konami keeps these pot cards that are coming out, they're good standalone cards, and they don't play well with the other pot cards, like that's fine by me, right? A good draw 2 with a cost or a restriction is nothing. It's not a problem until it's free.
You start stringing them together is when it's really like gonna suck.
But
that's gonna happen though. You know, they're gonna release the pot card that works well with one of these pot cards, and it's just gonna be insane.
Yeah. But that's all the time we have for this week's discussion. It went a lot better than I thought. You know, it was really fun to talk about. It was really fun to take a look back in Yu-Gi-Oh! All the way back to Pot of Greed and up to the newly released Pot of Prosperity. Joe, you got any thoughts about the topic that we talked about today?
I think the evolution of pot cards is probably one of the coolest things in Yu-Gi-Oh! That I've thought of in a long time.
Yeah.
Just kind of think like the decade, more or less over a decade if I think about it.
Oh, Argostus, this isn't a pot lore discussion. We're not talking about the flip monsters. We're not talking about the random goblin that's doing a bunch of stuff for the jar cards. This is just the evolution of the pot cards. But guys, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please.
Oh, one other thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Don't forget Douglas French has no sauce.
Piccolo, you have no sauce. Hey.
Guys, if you have enjoyed, please remember we post these podcasts every week, same time, same place, 8 a.m., iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, 10 a.m., YouTube. We do stream these. Next week, we will not be streaming them because we're actually recording that sometime during this week because I will be on the road next weekend, so I won't be able to record. But if you do want to check us out and you don't know where to do so, check the Discord. We got a good community growing, nothing crazy, but there's people in there. You can talk shit. You can tell Joe that he sucks at the game just like everybody else. You can tell Doug he's got no sauce. It's all good fun. So check out the Discord in the description. Check out youtube.com/thedualfactory, and I will see you guys back here next week. Peace out.
Okay, bye.